So not too long ago, a popular YouTube by the name of Sargon of Akkad made a video on autism, surprisingly enough, and the entire video, right, is basically this satirical parody where he portrays himself as a feminist and then says all sorts of crazy things as a way to sort of mock feminists and social justice warriors. Yeah, and their batshit insane ideas. But then it becomes quite horrifying when feminism is then equated to the spectrum, as in it's directly linked to Aspergian and autistic people. And because of the satirical nature of the video itself, it's quite difficult to get a sense of what Sargon's actual views on the matter are. Well, beyond that of it being ridiculous, of course. So what I'm going to do, right, is just address the video as if it were made by a social justice warrior, because there are indeed some interesting points that I want to make.
Now that we've checked your privilege, we're not going to be talking about something trivial like your life expectancy. Oh no, we're going to be talking about autism, specifically women's levels of autism and how they are significantly underdiagnosed. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, okay, how many casualties of autism are there every year? What is the body count? The final number? And the answer is, of course, millions.
The framing here is simply appalling, referring to us as casualties and, what's the body count? Millions. Well, no, there is no body count. You don't die from being born on the spectrum. It's similar to people equating us with cancer, which is also not true. We aren't suffering or in pain or affected in quotes or bedridden or dying. It's nonsense. It's like saying, I don't know, millions of people are dying because they're affected with blue eyes. It's counterfactual nonsense.
While we know that millions of women every year die from autism, we don't know how many because, of course, the patriarchy only focuses on men. When Hans Asperger first defined autistic psychopathy in 1944, he was talking about boys. He thought no women or girls were affected by the condition. A 1993 research paper in Sweden found a boy-to-girl ratio of 4:1. Others put the ratio at 16:1. And as you can see, this is not fair. But a more recent study by the National Autistic Society in 2015 suggests that women may be closing the autistic gap by reducing it to 3:1. But that's still not parity. However, feminist scientists around the world are compiling a growing body of evidence that more girls and women have the condition than originally thought, and that it is being significantly underdiagnosed because our culture just hates women. It just hates them. And this is because the diagnostic criteria for autism spectrum disorders has largely been based on the behavioural characteristics of the oppressor. But fear not. Charities are trying to close that gap by campaigning for changes to recognise the more nuanced way girls and women may present with the condition. They are both metaphorically and literally smashing the patriarchy.
Yes, there is a problem with women getting a diagnosis. I don't like to use the word problem because social justice warriors call everything problematic. Like, oh, this completely normal stuff is now problematic. But yeah, it is something that's a problem. If you can't get a diagnosis, you simply cannot get support. And usually what ends up happening when they try and get their diagnosis is that they're mistakenly diagnosed as having something that they don't have. So not only do they not have support, they also end up having a misdiagnosis to deal with. And that doesn't mean that it's caused by men. It certainly isn't. It's not any one person's fault or group of people's fault. It's simply a shortcoming of the diagnostic criteria. Okay, quite a long time ago, the diagnostic criteria had even greater issues. For example, in the 1940s or around there, we were thought of as simply being crazy, which still happens to an extent today, but that's a whole other topic. But my point is that gradually over time, our knowledge of the spectrum improved, and as a result, the diagnostic criteria also improved. Even if you step away from the whole women being unable to get a diagnosis thing, the diagnostic criteria still has a long to go. They actually took a step backwards with the DSM-5, for example, where they discontinued the Asperger's classification and then lumped it all in with autism and then called it a disorder, purely for economical and political reasons. But yeah, it's not just women that can't get a diagnosis, that sometimes men can't get a diagnosis. And it's quite often overdiagnosed for things that have nothing to do with the spectrum. They'll, for example, come across someone that's intellectually disabled and mistakenly conclude, oh yeah, that's autism. When in reality, intellectual disability, isn't related to the spectrum. Sure, you can be an autistic person and also be intellectually disabled, but they are a very tiny minority within, compared to every other AS person. Just as being intellectually disabled and being neurotypical is also a tiny portion of the neurotypical population. So in short, it is indeed a legitimate issue, not just this thing where social justice warriors are looking for reasons to demonize others. It has absolutely nothing to do with feminism. It's not something that's caused by men, but rather it's caused by a lack of knowledge within our own diagnostic criteria. If you lived, for example, in the Middle Ages and you got a tumor or something, you would most likely die because of it. Not because of society or because of some imaginary ruling class. No, it's simply because they lacked the knowledge to treat a tumor back then. And just like that tumor, your local GP will lack the knowledge to accurately identify AS people. Well, 100% of the time. He doesn't have perfect knowledge or even adequate knowledge in that regard.
Because traditional science, or science, is a patriarchal male social construct, specifically designed to exclude women and ensure that men always score better in anything that they do. And it's this very same science that goes on to show that the analysis of the brain scans reveals that autistic boys have different brain patterns in regions associated with motor function and the planning of motor activities. What this is a patriarchal conspiracy.
No, it isn't. You can't even prove that this patriarchy exists.
I'm going to level with you and give you the absolute truth of the matter. Autism is a feminist issue. 1 out of every 68 children today in the United States receives a diagnosis of autism, and of course, 1 out of 42 of them is male, and 100% of them have a Tumblr account. And many people think that autism is the fastest growing developmental disability in the US.
No, I'm not disabled, actually. And I'm not just saying that. By every definition of the word, I'm not disabled. And no, I didn't have any problems developing as a child either. As for our birth rates, they haven't changed at all, not even slightly. There is no epidemic of AS people. Those numbers are the result of more people receiving a diagnosis. So as the diagnostic criteria changes and hopefully becomes better, it should be more accurate and therefore can detect more AS people. It's not that because more of us are being born, that's utter crap. In fact, the changes in numbers also coincide with changes to the diagnostic criteria. Further, what a disgusting thought to be so concerned about people being born and what their birth rates are.
There are several accessible websites on autism, such as www.autismspeaks.org, which will, for example, give you information on the subject.
Now, to be very clear here, Sargon of Akkad is not the one citing Autism Speaks as a source. Sargon found this crazy article where social justice warriors cite Autism Speaks. But here you can hear Sargon almost lose it, as in he almost completely loses his composure during the parody and starts laughing his ass off. It's because one of the social justice warriors was actually dumb enough to cite a hate group right in the middle of their article. So basically they're pretending to be advocates for AS people and AS rights, yet because these social justice warriors know so little about us, they actually post a link to a fucking hate group, thinking it's a legitimate source. Autism Speaks is not a charity. If you do just a little bit of searching, you'll quickly see that they do not like us. They don't care about our quality of life. They're not interested in helping us. They sure as hell don't care about accurately representing us. They go about spreading the idea that we're this epidemic and this disease. They don't view the spectrum as part of who we are. They don't. They view NTs as being healthy, and they view us as NTs that have some sort of affliction. And it's similar to how you'll have some Christians that view gay people as something that's separate from the person, where they say things like, oh, hate the sin, not the sinner. But in short, they do not like us, and they desperately want to get rid of the spectrum. Yet these social justice warriors, these pretenders, are linking them as a fucking source. Well, imagine if there was a link to a KKK site in there. And these people have the fucking temerity to pretend that they're AS advocates.
There are 8 major signs of autism that you can identify in your friends, your family, your colleagues, your co-workers, perhaps even your business or your organization, or even a social movement you happen to identify with. The first is an extreme sensitivity to criticism. If you feel that a differing opinion makes you want to block that person, and everyone who has ever spoken to that person, possibly via use of a block bot on social media, you might have autism.
No, I don't have a problem with legitimate criticism. I don't block people for it either. Just the other day, for example, someone criticized my videos. He said what he wanted to say. I said what I wanted to say. He told me that there's too many videos where I just ramble about the spectrum. Okay. No, I didn't block him for it. I actually took his criticism on board and asked him what videos he wanted to see. One of the suggestions he gave me was Let's Plays of Skyrim, and I actually did some for my channel. I am going to switch over to Bloodstained as soon as that comes out, though.
The second one is that you have rigid thinking. You think that things are either right or they are wrong, and there is no grey area between them. For example, you might say that you are either a feminist or you are a sexist. If you reduce everything to these binary criteria, you might have autism.
Sure, there are some AS people that are known for rigid thinking. However, I am indeed open to entertaining new ideas and the possibility that I might be wrong.
Number 3 is that you are easily distressed when things aren't right. Meltdowns, loss of control often happen. For example, if you need safe spaces to be able to discuss anything that might slightly upset you, you might have autism.
A loss of control, in quotes. Well, it's not exactly the wording I would have used. There are actually people out there that mistakenly think that at any moment we're going to lose control and violently murder someone. No, definitely not the case. As for these safe spaces, they truly are an abomination. I should have made a video on them, and they are indeed an abuse of our rights. Anyone that says we need safe spaces is the most vile kind of human being, in my opinion. Putting a muzzle on our freedom of speech and our freedom of expression does indeed impact our quality of life, yeah, much more than murderers and rapists ever could, for example. And it's something that impacts a greater amount of people, not just AS people either, yeah, and over a greater span of time.
Number 4 is endless talking about or bulldogging a subject, usually in a monotone. For example, if you and your friends discuss a single subject constantly to the detriment of all others, you might have autism. Number 5 follows on from number 4. If you are often highly intelligent but focused on a narrow field that can become an obsession, if you have dedicated your entire career to the one thing you talk about constantly on the internet, you might have autism.
That's actually not what we're like. You know, I certainly couldn't talk endlessly about one thing. I don't know anyone else that can either. You know, even if it is on a special interest or an area of expertise. You know, if you meet some AS people, you'll find that we're actually much quieter compared to NTs.
Number 6. If you are socially challenged and have an inability to read facial expressions and body language, for example, if you can't tell when a consensual sexual encounter is being initiated without the explicit use of verbal cues, you might have autism.
I do hope that other AS people aren't dumb enough to complain about that.
Number 7. If you have little to no understanding about nuance and layers of meanings, and perhaps you have to make up your own definitions of words to be able to try and communicate your ideas with other people, you might have autism.
I do understand far more than you realize. I do see the nuance and the shades of grey. That's actually one of my pet peeves when someone asks me, do you understand? Especially when the subject matter is so basic and rudimentary. You know, people just assume we don't understand because, you know, we don't make the, you know, correct facial expression or something. I don't know. As for making up our own strange definitions for well-established words, no, I don't do that, nor do I know anyone else that does that. Words are quite plastic, as in, if a word is used a certain way by the majority, then that is how the word will be understood by most people. To pretend that a word has a vastly different definition, or, you know, to the one that everyone else is using, you know, it would be quite confusing and foolish.
And number 8. If you have a lack of empathy for other people, perhaps based on their gender or sexuality or race, you might have autism.
This is actually a very common stigma, you know, that we don't have empathy or emotions, or that we're somehow lacking in them. It's just not true. It's just a horrid misconception and stigma, you know, and it's the complete opposite of what, you know, AS people are, and is so far from the truth. You know, we do in fact have emotions and empathy, you know, a little bit more than NTs in some cases. Just because you don't see a particular emotion written on our faces, it doesn't mean that we don't feel it. Yeah, it's non sequitur. Yeah, expressing something is entirely different to feeling something. You know, the two simply aren't related that way. You know, it doesn't mean that we don't have, you know, emotions and feelings and thoughts. You know, just as everyone else. You know, just because you don't see them. If we see a person that we're close to with tears streaming down their face, you know, of course that affects you. Of course it does. You know, even if they're not close, it affects you. You know, if their expressions are very slight or they're closely guarded, yeah, we might miss them. Yeah, if the expressions of someone are well hidden, then yeah, they're going to remain hidden. Yeah. It's not because we lack empathy, that's just not the case.
I think that based on these criteria here, we can absolutely confirm that autism is a feminist issue. In fact, autism in women is so underdiagnosed that I strongly believe that all feminists should be considered to be raising awareness about autism whenever they are talking about feminism. In fact, I think feminists should do so much activism in raising awareness about autism that feminism and autism become synonymous. You can't talk about one without talking about the other. If you're a feminist and you're having a conversation with someone else about feminism, you are de facto raising awareness about autism. In fact, what we need to do to raise awareness of this most pressing of issues is a snappy feminist hashtag campaign. I suggest hashtag Feminists for Autism, that we can make go mega viral around the world and raise awareness for these poor, suffering women. Once we've got this hashtag trending, we can probably go on a letter writing campaign to various organisations and politicians to let them know about the connection between feminism and autism and all the good that we are doing. I know it's dreaming big, but we don't know where this humble campaign will go. Maybe one day, in the far future, when people think feminism, they'll also think autism. And maybe one day these poor suffering women and men can get the help that they so evidently need.
So basically, Sargon of Akkad found this article that tries to link the spectrum with feminism. And correct me if I'm wrong, he's pointing out just how ridiculous that is. Well, I'll go one step further. Trying to combine feminism with the spectrum is abhorrent and appalling, because we have very real and legitimate issues to contend with. And if we're put in the same camp as screeching social justice warrior assholes, that's when people stop taking us seriously. To the point where if I start talking about things that impact us, people will then assume, oh, that's just more social justice warrior nonsense. They're just looking for more imaginary dragons to slay. And I've actually had that happen before, where you start talking about something that's very real and very legitimate issue for AS people, and you'll have someone wave it off as, oh, that's just social justice warrior nonsense. And you have to stop and demonstrate that, yes, it's a real thing that exists. And I'm sure there are people out there that look at feminists being equated to us and think, oh, haha, isn't that funny? Well, no, not for us it fucking isn't. Popular feminism, as it is currently, is seen as quite toxic and hateful. And rightfully so, if you haven't been living under a rock. We have absolutely nothing to do with that. We're not related to it at all. It's just not accurate. We have very little in common with these social justice warrior extremists. I have met all sorts of AS people in real life, and we just aren't like that. We don't go around talking about trigger warnings and safe spaces or talk about how to be a professional victim. No, we don't go about demonizing others based on nonsense. We aren't hypersensitive and point out every little thing that we want censored. We aren't like people like Steve Shives. In real life, I have not met a single AS person that's like that. The thought of being commonly associated with those sorts of people, it's just absolutely horrifying. And to be associated with that by birth, being combined with feminism would be absolutely disastrous for AS people. All of our very real and legitimate issues, such as stigma and the unemployment rate, will be happily written off as imaginary. And I do hope it never happens.